I've got my two long grain glue ups out of the clamps, and they are pretty beastly. About 3 feet long by, I don't know, a couple feet wide by about 2.5 inches. The epoxy dried great, no problems that I can see here on the outside. Pretty thin line on top, but definitely a bunch of drips coming in the bottom. You know, they were sitting like this, so the epoxy kind of dripped down. So first I got to clear that off, and then my plan to slice these up, like I said, they're really heavy, so it's going to be a little tricky on the table saw. What I'm planning on doing is first use my Festool track saw and cut one edge nice and 90, or at least nice and straight cut. I'll probably have to do that in 2 passes, one on the top, one on the bottom, because I don't think I can get through the whole thickness here in one pass with the TS55. Then what I'm going to do is use that straight edge against the fence on my table saw. I think I'll have a better option instead of trying to use any kind of miter gauge or something. Run the straight edge against the fence and make cutoffs on the other side, and just move the fence, you know, 1.5, 1.25 inches each time, and make a slice. So that's my plan of attack at this point on these big slabs. So we'll give that a shot. You know what cleans up great with a hand plane? Epoxy. Let's check it out. This is the underside of the slab where that epoxy was dripping down, so you can see a lot of big dry glue drips here. These again clean up great with a hand plane. You can hear the shavings of the epoxy drips, and with just a few passes we'll be able to get these drips right off of here. It's pretty cool. You can see the all the little circles of epoxy drips, like those you know, round hole punches. In all seriousness, it does clean up really easily with a hand plane. I'm super impressed. And then if I really wanted to get it clean, I don't care for this, but you can come along with a scraper and get in there, clean that epoxy, no problem. Comes right off beautifully. So, definitely really impressed with how easy it is to get this off. Cutting those long grain glue ups went without a hitch. I used the TS55 Festool to first make that straight edge, then reference that on the fence and sliced up the long grain glue up at the table saw. Ended up with slices like these. This is from one of the long grain glue ups, and here's from the other one. And these are the full width, about just under 2 feet. And I needed about 10 of each of these for one section of the countertop. It's the widest section. The other 2 sections are a little more narrow, about this wide, and these are about 15 inches. So I first cut off about 10 full width slices from each of the long grain glue ups, and then I cut the long grain glue up. I cut off an edge. So here's a leftover edge from one of the long grain glue ups. And then I went through and sliced the rest of it, which now was only about 15 inches wide, and ended up with another 20 or so of these, and these are for the other 2. There are 3 sections, a wider section and 2 smaller sections. So that slicing went without a problem. I found going through the blade pretty quickly was the way to go to avoid burning. If I went slower, I got a little bit of burning, a little bit of heat building up and some burning. So I went steady hand, quickly through the blade, and ended up with no issues. I did clean up the slices at the sander, a pass, to clean up one face, and then flipped it, clean up the other face. That definitely removed any, if I had slight burning, that removed that quickly and easily without a problem. I've got one of the countertop sections here in the clamps. I've taken those slices, put them like this in the right pattern, and glued them up. Pretty much the same procedure as for the long grain glue up. Spread epoxy along the edges, and then I first clamped them down flat to my assembly table to get them nice and flat to each other. And then I went ahead and cinched them up along the glue line to, of course, tighten them up so that glue can set, and we'll have a nice countertop. So I've got the bigger section is over here and it's done. All the glue is all dry. I've got it clamped to my bench to keep it flat before I do the final cleanup. And then this one here, the glue has just dried. I'm about to do the third one. Here is a closer look at the countertop glue up. Again, I cinched down the pieces to each other using these couple of bow clamps running this way. There are some cawls underneath, directly under these bow clamps, and I cinched down these clamps to get the pieces nice and flat to each other first. And then I have bow clamps here at the end, both ends, and then cinched up these clamps across the glue line to pull them nice and tight. I've got my first of 3 countertops here all glued up, ready for the next step. I'm now going to trim it to size. I'm going to use the Festool track saw again to trim an edge square to one of these reference edges. Then I'll probably use the table saw to cut the other side, or I might use the Festool saw just to cut the other side to the correct width. This is about 1 1/8 inches thick. So what I'm going to do is mount this to 3/4 plywood to bring it to just under 2 inches total thickness. So I'm going to mount it using screws from underneath. I'll elongate the holes just in case this has any movement. I don't expect it to, but if it does, I want to make sure I'm not cracking this top. This top does have a little bit of warp to it if it's not cinched down. So mounting it to the plywood I think will also help flatten it out a bit. And then that whole assembly gets an edge, a Paduke edge, long grain edge, to hide the plywood and to edge it nicely. And then that assembly will get mounted on top of the cabinets.